Nick, can you switch on my video briefly? I don't know what my background is. Maybe I can do it while I'm still
I
on.
can't enable it from my side. You need to do it from your side.
It tells me that I can't. Oh, now I can. Okay. Now, William.
Hey.
Okay, we're going live.
Cool.
Okay, we're now live.
Afternoon, everybody. As per usual, we'll wait a few minutes for everybody to check in. Hi, everybody. Yeah, we're going to wait 2 more minutes and then I'll hand over to William. Hi, Charlene. How you doing? I'm good, thanks. See, the weather in Cape Town's not great. Charlene's asking how many attendees do we have? We've got 56 so far. Okay, hi everybody. So William has kindly offered to give us another opinion on the state of politics and business economy in SA. Thank you for that, William. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, Russell. And hello again to everyone. And apologies, I started with apologies because I didn't answer all of the questions. I got questions afterwards with the last one. So I'll try and incorporate it in this discussion and respond to it. And there's just a rider also. I'm not going to give any sort of personal finance or respond to that type of questions and so on. But let me start. I mean, you know, unfortunately, we're in a much more negative space since the last time we spoke. Where we now, just from South Africa, in terms of the COVID-19, in relation to our peers around the world. I mean, we're now at the top 6 of countries when it comes to, you know, COVID-19 increases. We were the US, Brazil, India, Russia, and Mexico. From our side, we've got less deaths per capita and more recoveries, you know, than many of the other countries. But also what's happening around the world, also we've been seeing some new cases in countries that appear to have dealt with the issue. We've seen it in the last week or so in Australia, reinfections in the UK and in Germany, and so on, and even in parts of China and so on. So that is from a global point of view, and where South Africa sits in relation to our spread compared to other countries. Now, let's look at South Africa's own very specific COVID-19 strategy. When I spoke the last time, I mean, there was a lot of optimism. People were very positive about government's strategy. I think now, at this moment, government strategy is being heavily criticized from all corners of the country. And the first criticism really is that a government strategy is not very differentiated. It's not very practical often, and it's often not very rational. So what's happening in other countries, for example, just when I'll take you, just focus on the issue of a differentiated strategy. What it means is that what many countries now do, now let me just take you to in Australia. I mean, they've seen the last week, or last 2 weeks infection, cases of reinfection. So what they do, instead of a one-size-fits-all lockdown, they will isolate the area and then will have restrictions in the area where there are high infections, and they would have less restrictions in areas where there's a lower rate of COVID-19. In that way, it's a balance between the health on the other sides and also nurturing the economy back. Now, in our case, so far, it's been throughout the country a one-size-fits-all lockdown regime, which chokes off the whole economy, whereas a much more differentiated approach would give parts of the economy some breathing space. I know you may have seen that last week, the Western Cape government asked central government to allow them at least to lift restrictions there. I mean, we've got in other provinces like the Northern Cape where we have less COVID-19 cases. They could presumably, for example, have less restrictions. But in the current situation, the current government strategy or regime is a one-size-fits-all, which has been heavily criticized. Now, just in terms of the rationality of our strategy, I mean, our strategy has been criticized, the South African strategy of not being rational. What do I mean by rational? Rational is it believable from a citizen point of view? Now, in order for people to buy in, to comply with rules, to follow rules, they must have some reasonable perception or that the policies are rational. If large numbers of people believe policies are not rational, they're not going to follow it, they're not going to comply. Now, less specific examples, allowing, for example, minibus taxis to be 100% full, but not allowing restaurants to open. Now, it doesn't, it's not rational, because if you're in a minibus taxi, 100% full, that's a very high risk. And in a restaurant, there could be many practices to make social distancing and so on that can make it much more safer than to be in a minibus taxi. So it doesn't appear to be rational. And of course, the old bugbear, banning sales of cigarettes and alcohol. I mean, it does not appear to be rational. All it does is that the sales of these items go underground, goes to the black market. The state loses income and so on. But broadly, it really makes it very difficult for citizens to take government seriously and to take the rules seriously. And that for me is, one of the important drawbacks of not having a rational strategy. And then, of course, enforcement has been quite lax compared to the first few weeks after lockdown. When I say enforcement, it would mean wearing masks and so on. So generally weak enforcement, and also, even more importantly, it appears that many powerful sectors of society get away with not complying, like the taxi industry. They've been breaking rules, they've been doing their own thing. And it raises the question, if they can break the rules and government is not doing anything, why can't cigarette companies, for example, not sell cigarettes, or why can't alcohol producers not distribute alcohol if taxis get away with it? So really, this uneven implementation of COVID-19 strategy has been undermining government's credibility and also our overall COVID-19 strategy. Then, of course, a rise in corruption. The last few weeks, incidents of corruption has really outraged many South Africans, and it's also undermined the government's credibility, and it's undermined the strategy, the COVID-19 strategy. So let me talk about the COVID-19 politics. What's the state of politics at the moment? The ANC right now is divided between those for Ramaphosa and those against him. And I mean, to simplify it, the division really is quite a number of ANC people argue now. They say, well, the COVID-19 crisis, because so many businesses are collapsing, so many private businesses are collapsing, now let's bring the state in, make the state the leading actor in this COVID-19 economy, the post-COVID-19 economy, bring in state-owned entities and so on. Of course, many of you know that most state-owned companies doesn't have the capacity. I mean, they are drained on the system, and to try to bring them back into the economy really will not do any good for us. It really will undermine the economy in broad terms. So that's the one group. And then there's the Ramaphosa group who argue much more for business to be taking the lead now in COVID-19. They argue, well, state doesn't have enough capacity. The private sector should take the leading role, and this is the opportunity for the private sector. Now, unfortunately, within the ANC, there's a division between these two camps, and it means because there's a division, there's no strategic leadership, there's no strategic focus, because the center is divided. And then, of course, also, Sir Ramaphosa himself, for many people, has become a disappointment because he's been really overcautious. In this big fight between the two groups in the ANC, he has not taken the lead. I mean, he has not asserted himself. And I think many South Africans are very disappointed with him at this stage. Unfortunately, there's also been a rift between government and the business sector. In the last few months, I've been advising business for South Africa. This is, the umbrella organization for big business. There's all the listed companies. How to engage with government, with a government where there are so many people in government who don't want to see the private sector taking the leading role, but who want to have the state taking the leading role in this crisis, knowing full well that the state doesn't have the capacity. And this is quite a significant problem for the economy because South Africa's strength compared to our emerging market peers, our other competitors, we've got a very strong private sector. So if we can bring together the private sector and the public sector, you know, the country will be on a winning route. But if the state goes alone or if the private sector goes alone, it'd be very difficult for us to quicken the recovery from COVID-19. So it's very important for us as a country, if we want to recover very quickly from COVID-19, that there is a partnership between the public sector and the private sector. And in that partnership, the private sector takes the lead. Now, so if there's a rift between the government and the private sector, we really have a problem. Now, just in real terms, how does it look? I mean, organized business issued their own economic strategy about 4 weeks ago. And I initially, when I advised them a couple of months ago, this is sort of April, I said, look, you know, as big business, come up with your own economic strategy. Economic strategy that makes sense for the country. So business has now come up with an economic strategy. Now the ANC as a political party has also come out with their own economic strategy. And unfortunately, these two economic strategies don't talk to each other. The ANC's economic strategy, again, sadly talks about the government must take full control of the economy. But the government itself, remember there's the ANC and then there's government. The government itself doesn't have an economic strategy yet to deal with COVID-19. So we've got an ANC strategy, we've got a business strategy, but government itself doesn't have an economic strategy. So because the government doesn't have an economic strategy, it really will make it will slow down economic recovery. And to end off, if we compare ourselves as a country, as you know, our economic situation in the midst of COVID-19, we compared with our peers. South Africa is affected at the same level as developed countries. Now, when I say affected, I talk in relation to our economy, although we have fewer resources. And that's a really dilemma for our country. If you look at our peer developing countries, how their economies have been affected, their economies have been affected less than South Africa. And if we look at past financial crisis, the last financial crisis, 2008, 2009, it took South Africa about 2 years to recover from that crisis. It is very likely that it will take us maybe double now to come out of the COVID-19 crisis. And often, even with the 2008, 2009 crisis, our peers, our developing country peers, came out quicker out of that crisis. They took about a year or so. So we are taking much longer in the past, we took much longer to come out of the crisis. Seemingly, again, now with COVID-19, we will take longer than our peers. To end off on a positive note, we've got an IMF loan. That IMF loan will really restrict, part of the restrictions is IMF is asking South Africa to stay with business-friendly policies and so on. So that is very important, because when government finally comes up with its own economic strategy, that economic strategy must be business-friendly. Thank you. I'll open it up for questions.
Cool. Thanks, William. First question that we have is from Gus. You refer to an economic strategy of the ANC, and which it takes control of the economy. Practically, what are the potential examples of what this actually means?
You know what, I just missed that question. I didn't understand that question, please. Yes, sorry, Russ, I didn't understand it.
You refer to an economic strategy of the ANC in which it takes control of the economy. What are practical or potential examples of what this actually means?
I get it, yeah. I mean, for example, in the ANC economic strategy, it says create more state-owned companies. It wants the Reserve Bank, for example, to finance, to put up a fund to finance infrastructure. It wants pension funds, it's calling for pension funds to be used for infrastructure. I mean, those are some of the examples. If you listen to those examples, I mean, it's not a pragmatic example. I mean, it's not pragmatic policy making. That's not the kind of policies that we now need during COVID-19.
Not many questions coming in. I've got one of my own though. And talking about the president, and especially within the ANC, we often saw Zuma take action, what would seem unilaterally. Could he actually be more assertive? For example, when ACE asked for the reinstatement of the two Limpopo people involved in corruption, could he actually put his foot down and get his way and say no?
Yeah. So Ramaphosa's dilemma now is he needs to be assertive, but in order for him to, when he's assertive, it may mean breaking the ANC. Breaking the ANC splitting the ANC formally between the groups for him and the groups against him. It is important for South African politics and also for the South African economy, I think, that we get rid, or that the ANC's cut off the wing that is anti-business, that is status, that is corrupt, and so on. But Ramaphosa doesn't appear to have the courage to do that, because if he does that, if he stands firm, as you ask, which he should, it would mean that, you know, a part of the ANC should break away, or alternatively, you know, some of the ANC, those opposed him, will try to depose him as ANC leader. And that would mean that he may then have to come to South Africans, to the broader South Africans, and say, well, if I'm firm, I will be deposed as ANC leader, but South Africans need to support me. But I think if he has the courage to ask South Africans to support him when he's firm, I think South Africans will support him. At the moment, the courage seems missing from Ramaphosa.
Just an extension to that question, with the way that the ANC-NEC works, does the president of the party have an overriding vote, or is it still a collective?
You know, the ANC of the party doesn't have an overriding vote, but we saw what Zuma, he could do. He said, I'm the president, I'm going to do what I need to do, and so on. So so Ramaphosa has still a lot of leeway to take leadership. So he has a lot of leeway to do that, but he's not taking his opportunities.
Okay, a question from Anonymous. William, are you feeling positive about SA's recovery from this?
At the moment, the way things stands, I don't want to say I'm pessimistic. I'll say I'm moderately. I'll try to be diplomatic. Okay, no, I'm pessimistic about the fact that it may take us longer to get a recovery, whereas we have all opportunities to shorten the recovery if we take some of the hard political and economic decisions. But it appears within the ANC, the political will and the political courage is missing to take the hard political decisions, but the hard political decisions will make the recovery easier and quicker for us. So I am a bit pessimistic about whether there is the political will to make the recovery quicker. And the recovery can only be made quicker if tough and firm decisions are being made.
Another question from Anonymous. Do you see exchange controls being reinstated and prescribed assets for pension funds being applied soon?
Yeah. Now, I saw on the site also, and I'm going to link the two questions. There was a question from the IMF COVID-19 loan. It was, that it didn't come with rules. The IMF loan came with very soft rules, but there's some informal rules to it, and there's some market rules. And some of these rules is because we've accepted that all of these things, exchange control regulations and so on, it would be very difficult for the ANC to implement it, or for the ANC government to implement it now, not after the IMF loan. Because, you know, yes, the IMF loan appears to have soft rules, not as tough as in many other, like say in Latin America or in other African countries. But, you know, there's also unset rules, market rules. You get a loan, there's expectations of certain kind of behavior of government, and the behavior has to be pro-market behavior. It cannot be anti-market, you know, status type of behavior. If it's that type of behavior, there's going to be a market backlash. So the IMF rule actually is a disciplining force for the ANC to stay, you know, a pro-market and business-friendly course. So that thing makes me actually optimistic. So yes, we've got a loan, and, you know, it's, of course it's bad, and it will look bad to go out and get a loan, but the self-imposed restrictions that comes with a loan actually will be good for the economy, because it will force government, you know, to steer a pro-business and a pro-market route.
And then coming back to the previous question on, do you see exchange of controls being reinstated and prescribed assets for pension funds being applied?
Yeah, that was actually, so I meant in terms of exchange, I don't see it happening. Neither of these two are happening because of the IMF loan itself. The IMF, you know,
okay.
I mean, it will never be tolerated by the IMF or by the markets now, especially since we've taken that
loan. Question from Muzi. Is there alignment in understanding the severity of issues facing the country, particularly issues facing the youth between private sector and government? Can government really step aside and let the private sector lead many of the government programs?
You know, the irony is there's an alignment with the issues between business and government, but there's not alignment over the action, over the policies, and that's our problem. Yeah? But although there's an alignment between about half of the ANC and business, and a disalignment between the other half of the ANC and business. So the one half of the ANC, sort of the Ramaphosa group, understand, you know, that they need to partner with business, and then the other half, the sort of anti-Ramaphosa people, are opposed to that, and so on. Now, unfortunately, the problem then is that Ramaphosa has not, and his group hasn't taken enough leadership to push aside or marginalize this other group within the ANC that's opposed to a government business partnership and an alignment on policy. So that's, you know, Ramaphosa hasn't been brave enough to do that, and that really is at the heart of all of our problems right now, of the paralysis in government right
now. You say that the Ramaphosa group hasn't been assertive enough, but is it a problem that the two factions are sort of equally balanced and it's a bit of a Mexican standoff?
Absolutely. I know you're right. They are equally balanced. And I guess if you Ramaphosa, if you can remember, he won as president of the ANC with a couple of votes, not many votes. So it's a finely balanced group. But if Ramaphosa takes a different view, if he takes the view that, well, there is the ANC, he's half of the ANC, but there's the rest of South Africa. So if he brings his half of the ANC and align himself with the rest of South Africa, that's outside the ANC, you know, he has a winning combination. Because the rest, I mean, most of South Africa, I think, are sick and tired of the sort of the Ace Mahasula type of corrupt people in the ANC that's holding not only the ANC hostage, but the whole country hostage.
Question from Gus, and it has a follow-up as well. Is there a view that the ANC could split or join another player such as Mashaba? And a follow-on from that question is Mashaba a realistic alternative to the ANC? So
maybe broadly, so to start off on a broad, you know, unfortunately, the opposition parties have disappeared during this crisis. I mean, it's pretty sad because what we have now, all of our focus is on the ANC politics. The opposition parties have nowhere to be seen. It's almost like this crisis has destroyed the opposition parties. I mean, their voice is gone. Mashaba appears to be the only person now, you know, a bit of a light in the dark the opposition parties. But he's still busy setting up, his party. He doesn't have yet, and even when he sets up his party, it's very likely that his party is going to be limited initially to Gauteng and not really a national movement. And that's our problem now, is in our politics, the opposition parties are not united. And the ANC is also divided. So theoretically, there should be alignment between the Ramaphosa group in the ANC and some opposition parties outside the ANC. Unfortunately, everything depends on Ramaphosa and whether he has the courage to realign South Africa's politics. I mean, COVID-19 actually offers the opportunity to realign our politics. This crisis is so big, our politics can't be the same as it was before. This should be a moment of realignment. But the problem is, in this moment there's a perfect moment for realignment. The opposition parties appear too weak, out of their depth. The DA it has their own crisis. The EFF remains populist. The only new formation is Masaba and his party is, still at the beginning stage. And then the ANC under Ramaphosa is too cautious to actually take his group of ANC out of the current ANC and align himself with opposition parties.
From Anonymous, people have spoken of a potential civil war looming. What are your thoughts on this?
I think, I don't see a civil war coming, but what I will see is, unless we deal with issues like corruption, and unless the state become more efficient, unless we get economic growth going as quickly as possible, we will have heightened, social unrest. There will be more protests, more social unrest, and so on. And if people don't get food on time, government is struggling to distribute food because it doesn't have the capacity and it doesn't want to bring in the private sector, it doesn't want to bring in civil society. Then we will have food riots also. So that's what I will see, not necessarily civil war, but food riots, social unrest, unemployment taking to the streets. So quite a bit of political unrest unless we deal with the issues.
Another question from Muzi. We often refer to the NDP as a plan. Do you think it is a concrete plan or more of a charter or even a wish list?
Unfortunately, Muzi, the NDP is more, I worked on a base document many years ago of the NDP, and so on. It is, it's a wish list. Normally, economic strategy or economic plans, at least in the post-war period in the countries where it's been successful, is much more focused. So the NDP right now, it's a big vision, but it's not a practical plan. And unfortunately, also with COVID-19 has overtaken the NDP. So the NDP is not relevant anymore in the crisis of COVID-19. COVID-19 is not just a health crisis, but it's a financial crisis. The NDP was not put together for a crisis like this. It was almost like a peacetime, a big vision, and it's not adequate. So we'll have to redraw almost everything. All our plans that we had in the past, unfortunately, doesn't work for the situation, for our current situation. We have to rethink, reboot, and put all of our heads together. But the NDP really is not a plan for our times.
Would the ANC's ideological stance, such as NHI, not get in the way of recovery?
Unfortunately, so that ideological stance, and again, I must emphasize, it's not a whole of the ANC. It's about, for lack of a better way to describe it, let's say it's half of the ANC who is insisting on a very ideological part. And then the other half of the ANC is much more open-minded and much more pragmatic. And that's the problem. And then our problem is that the ANC cannot square, the one wing that is very much NHI, very much state-driven. The other one, which is very much pro-market, partnership with business. There's a fight between these two. And because there's a fight, the compromises to hold these two wings of the ANC together means we compromise on policy. we're not clear on policy, we paralyze because of the continued compromises between these two groups.
Question from Anonymous. If the ANC splits or loses the elections, is there a chance of the EFF coming in? Is there a chance of a split?
Yeah, so I think the first thing we have to think about, the chance of its splitting. I think COVID-19 may actually provide a kind of internal force that may push the ANC towards a split. But a split in the ANC will really depend on Cyril Ramaphosa. Is he brave enough to make a split happen and then reform South Africa's politics? Maybe perhaps going on his own with one part of the ANC, aligning with the opposition parties and so on. And this type of situation is not new. Thabo Mbeki tried to do that. I mean, he tried to split the ANC and go away with one part of the ANC. And of course, he was at the time ejected and he was replaced then by Jacob Zuma. So I think Ramaphosa fears type of Thabo Mbeki scenario if he, if he tries, or if people see that he's pushing the ANC towards a split to try to get rid of the sort of hardline people. And before he can do that, they'll try to get him out of the ANC or depose him as ANC president the same way they did with Thabo Mbeki.
Question from Andre. A movement that has gained a lot of traction for the Cape is the Cape Independence Party. Is Cape secession a viable option or just a pie in the sky? Yeah, no, I've seen them and I've watched. I think really it's much more of a sort of a smaller. My sense more of a fringe, on the fringe side, rather than a sort of as a viable option. What is for me more viable is, I think, the Western Cape, where the DA is in control, I think they have much more freedom to do their own thing. I think to overcourses, I was just thinking just in terms of now, the Premier De Vinde, he'd been asking the national government for the Western Cape, to lift restrictions. And the national government has been very, very slow. But actually, if one look at the way the constitution is structured, the Western Cape has much more maneuvering space to do things their own way. It's just that, for the last couple of decades, most of the provinces were run by the ANC, and all of the ANC provinces has always been very loyal to central government. They've never pushed the boundaries of their powers. So I think perhaps this COVID-19 should also be a moment for the Western Cape to try to push the boundaries of what, the constitution allow. How much can they do things independently from central government? They must also, themselves be courageous and push the boundaries. Okay, we're running short on time, so I'll take two more questions, and we've got 5 in the box. One from Muzi again. Will Ramaphosa come back for the second term? I think, at this moment, it looks very unlikely. If he continues as pedestrians, in this sort of pedestrian way up to now, he's not going to last in the ANC. And that is why it's so important for him. He needs to make some bold moves because if he doesn't do anything, he's not going to last in any case. So he might as well be bolder and say, well, I will get rid of the hardliners in the ANC. I'll free myself of them and I'll build a new coalition. That may be his only way of survival politically into the long term, because if he continues like this, he cannot please both camps and he cannot please South Africans by compromising like this all of the time. So he is going to lose his job pretty soon if this is the way he's going. Last question. How long do you think the recovery will take to get to 2019 levels? Is the rand going to hold? Obviously, it's how long is a piece of string? Yeah. I think about 4 years, and if we go on this sort of pedestrian way, if nothing changes in our politics, yeah. But
I mean, to be honest, you know, we could do it under 2 years. I mean, if there's much more, if the ANC or if Ramaphosa is much more bolder, and if we have that partnership with business and partnership with civil society, you know, we could cut the recovery by half. But if we continue on this sort of very slow pedestrian, Ramaphosa wants to please everyone, no bold decisions, then we're looking at a 3 to 4 year recovery period.
Cool. William, thanks very much again. Appreciate your insights. And thanks everybody for attending. And I'm sure there will be a third edition in the near future.
Hopefully more positive, yeah.
Everybody, cheerio.
Okay, thank you all. Stay safe. Bye.
You too.
Okay, and we should be clear. I see they've introduced an extra click to remove people. But yeah, okay, I've stopped recording. Thanks very much for everything.